The last satisfactory inspection report had been filed 9 minutes ago, and now the entire south wing of the Grand Bellevue Hotel in Charleston, South Carolina, was descending into the kind of chaos that expensive places try very hard to pretend does not exist. Somewhere behind the tall double doors of Ballroom C, 420 chairs sat in precise rows beneath crystal chandeliers. Somewhere in the loading dock, a 12-tier wedding cake was being unloaded from a refrigerated van by two men who had not yet been told that the evening's head chef had quit 45 minutes earlier, walked out through the service entrance, thrown his apron into a pudding mold, and driven away in a black Audi without saying goodbye to anyone. The bride's father, a man named Douglas Pemberton, had paid $600,000 for this wedding. The guests would begin arriving in 4 hours. Celeste Marchetti stood in the center of the hotel's executive kitchen, with both hands pressed flat against the stainless steel island, and her jaw locked so tightly that the small vein along her left temple had become visible. She was 33 years old, the youngest general manager the Grand Bellevue had ever appointed, and she had held the position for exactly 7 months. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back in a precise low knot. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white silk blouse, a thin gold chain at her throat, and heels that added 2 inches to her already considerable height. Everything about her presentation suggested a woman in command. Everything inside her chest suggested otherwise. Her events director, a man named Philip Crane, stood 2 paces behind her with his phone in both hands, scrolling through a staffing agency contact list with the grim efficiency of a man looking for a lifeboat. Philip was 41, lean, and perpetually groomed. His suits were always correct. His opinions were always loud. He had been passed over for the general manager position 7 months ago, and the bruise from that decision had never quite healed. "Every agency in the city is booked," Philip said. "It is a Saturday in June. Every competent chef within 90 miles is already working." Celeste did not look at him. She looked at the kitchen. The prep stations were half-loaded. Vegetables sat in ice baths. Sauces had been started but not finished. The pastry team was intact. The line cooks were intact, but the head chef's absence had created a vacuum that no one in the room had the authority or the skill to fill. The menu was a 7-course French-Southern fusion-tasting menu that Chef Renaud had designed specifically for the Pemberton wedding. It existed only in his notes, his mise en place, and his memory. And now he was gone. "What about internally?" Celeste asked. "Someone on the line, someone who's led a service before." Philip gave a small, careful shake of his head. "The sous chef is 24 and has never run a kitchen on her own. She is in the walk-in right now, and I believe she is crying." 4 hours. Celeste could feel Douglas Pemberton's money pressing against the walls of the room like heat. Outside the service entrance of the Grand Bellevue, on the cracked asphalt of the delivery lane, a man named Donovan Slade was kneeling beside a white panel van with both hands covered in flour dust. He was 36 years old, with broad shoulders, deep-set brown eyes, and a close-trimmed beard that was just beginning to show a few threads of early gray along the jaw. He wore a plain navy blue t-shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of clean but visibly worn work boots. His daughter, Wren, sat in the passenger seat of the van with her legs crossed and a small stuffed rabbit named Biscuit propped against the dashboard. She was 7 years old, with dark hair cut straight across her forehead and wide brown eyes that noticed everything and forgot nothing. Donovan had arrived at the service entrance 11 minutes ago to deliver a case of specialty bread loaves. He ran a small one-man operation out of a rented commercial kitchen on the north side of the city, baking artisan bread and delivering it to restaurants that could not afford or did not want a full-time baker on staff. The Grand Bellevue was not one of his regular accounts. A friend of a friend had called in a favor, one delivery, $50. He had brought Wren because it was Saturday and there was no one else. He was loading the last crate onto a service cart when the kitchen's back door swung open and a young woman in a chef's coat came out, sat down on an overturned milk crate, and began crying into her hands with the specific, full-body intensity of someone whose professional life had just collapsed in real time. Her name tag read Mia. Donovan paused. He glanced back at the van. Wren was watching through the windshield with her chin propped on Biscuit's head, her eyes wide. "You all right?" Donovan asked. Mia looked up. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. "Our head chef walked out," she said. "There's a $600,000 wedding in 4 hours and nobody can finish the menu. And I'm supposed to be the sous chef, but I have never run a service alone. And I don't even know what's in course 5 because he never wrote it down." She said all of this in one breath, and then she pressed her palms against her eyes and exhaled a sound that was closer to a moan than a sigh. Donovan was quiet for a moment. Then he crouched down so he was closer to her eye level. "What's on the menu?" Mia blinked. 7-course French Southern fusion, seared foie gras with bourbon peach glaze, Carolina gold rice risotto, duck confit with collard green puree, butter poached lobster with smoked corn velouté. She trailed off. "I don't even know what he was planning for the intermezzo." Donovan looked at the kitchen door. He could hear voices inside. He could hear the clatter of stainless steel and the low, directionless hum of a team that had lost its center. "How many covers?" he asked. 420. "Line intact. 6 cooks. Pastry team of 3. They're all here. They just don't know what to do." Donovan stood up. He looked at the van. He looked at the kitchen door. He looked at Mia. Something in his posture shifted, very slightly, the way a current shifts under a still surface. "Can I see the prep?" he asked. Mia stared at him. "You're the bread guy." "I am." "You deliver bread." "I do." "This is a 400-cover 7-course wedding dinner." Donovan did not argue. He simply held the door open and waited. What Celeste Marchetti saw when she turned around was a man in a flour-dusted t-shirt walking into her kitchen beside her crying sous chef. He did not belong there. Everything about him, his clothes, his boots, the white powder on his forearms, announced that he did not belong. "Who is this?" she said. "He's the bread delivery," Mia said. "But we do not have time for bread," Celeste said. Her voice was controlled but thin, like a wire pulled tight. "We need a chef, an actual, qualified, professional chef who can execute a 7-course tasting menu for 420 people without destroying the most important event this hotel has hosted in a decade." Donovan did not react to the word actual. He looked at the prep stations. He looked at the sauces that had been started. He walked, without asking permission, to the nearest station and lifted the lid on a steel pot. He smelled it. He tilted the pot slightly and watched the way the liquid moved. "Your stock base is solid," he said. "Whoever started this knew what they were doing. The fond is clean. You've got good bones here." Celeste's eyes narrowed. "I did not ask you to evaluate my kitchen." "No, ma'am. But your kitchen is asking someone to finish what got started." Philip Crane stepped forward. He looked Donovan up and down with the kind of gaze that begins at the shoes and never quite makes it to the eyes. "This is a 5-star hotel," Philip said. "We cannot hand a $600,000 wedding to a man who showed up in a bread van." From the doorway of the service entrance, Wren's small face appeared. She had climbed out of the van and followed the sound of her father's voice. She stood with Biscuit pressed under one arm and her other hand resting lightly on the doorframe. She did not step inside. She just watched, with the absolute stillness of a child who had learned early how to be invisible in rooms where adults were upset. Philip noticed her, and he brought his kid, Philip said, lowering his voice only slightly. "This is not a daycare. This is not some small-town potluck. This is the Pemberton wedding." Wren's hand tightened on Biscuit's ear. She did not look away from Philip, but something in her face folded inward like a page being turned to hide what was written on it. Donovan turned. He did not look at Philip. He walked to his daughter, knelt in front of her, and adjusted the collar of her t-shirt where it had folded in on itself. "Hey," he said softly. "Remember what we talked about this morning? That some people see the outside first, Wren said. And what did I say? That the outside is not the answer key. Donovan smiled. It was a small, warm, tired smile. Go sit in the van for a few more minutes, okay? I'll come get you. Wren nodded. She looked once more at the tall woman in the blazer and the man in the expensive suit. Then she walked back through the service door, climbed into the van, and set Biscuit on the dashboard facing outward, as if the rabbit needed to keep watch. Celeste had seen the exchange. She had not intended to watch it, but she had. And the quiet precision of the moment, the father kneeling, the daughter repeating a lesson she had clearly heard before, had left a small, unwelcome mark somewhere behind her ribs. She turned away from it. We need a real solution, she said to Philip. Call the restaurant at the Harbor Club. Call the Meridian. Call anyone. I have called everyone, Philip said. It is 4 o'clock on a Saturday in June. 3 hours and 48 minutes. Donovan had not left. He stood near the prep station where the risotto base had been partially assembled. He picked up a wooden spoon, stirred once, and set it down. This risotto base was started with too much acid, he said, to no one in particular. If you serve it as is, it'll fight the butter at the finish. You need to pull it back with a half measure of bone broth reduction before you add the Carolina Gold. Enter collard green puree. He looked at the next station. Someone blanched the greens in salted water, which is correct, but then shocked them in unsalted ice water, which will pull the seasoning back out. You'll need to re-season from scratch before you blitz. The kitchen went quiet, not silent, but the kind of quiet that falls over a room when someone has said something that every professional in it knows is right and no one wants to be the first to admit it. Mia, who had stopped crying, was staring at Donovan with the expression of someone who has just been handed a life jacket by a stranger on the sidewalk. How do you know that? She whispered. Donovan did not answer the question directly. He did not tell them, not yet, that 10 years ago he had been the youngest executive sous chef in the history of a 2 Michelin-star restaurant in New York. He did not tell them that he had trained under a man who believed that sound was as important as taste, that a correctly reducing stock had a particular voice, that a pan reaching the right temperature made a specific whisper against the oil. He did not tell them about the car accident that had taken his wife Janine 3 years ago, or about the months afterward when the grief had been so heavy that holding a knife felt dangerous, not because he wanted to hurt himself, but because his hands would not stop shaking. He did not tell them that he had walked away from fine dining because the hours would have meant leaving Wren with strangers every night, and that was a trade he was not willing to make. He did not tell them that the bread van was not a step down. It was a choice. It was the choice that let him walk his daughter to school every morning and read to her every night. He said only, "I've cooked before." Celeste looked at him for a long moment. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Douglas Pemberton's personal assistant, asking to confirm that the amuse-bouche would include the truffle foam as discussed. 3 hours and 41 minutes. If you touch that kitchen, Celeste said slowly, and anything goes wrong, anything, I will personally ensure that your name is known to every hotel and restaurant in the city for the wrong reasons. Donovan met her eyes. His voice was steady. If I don't touch that kitchen, he said, you won't need to spread my name. Yours will already be on every tongue in Charleston by morning. Celeste's jaw tightened. She wanted to dismiss him. She wanted a solution that looked the way solutions were supposed to look. Polished, credentialed, wearing a proper chef's coat. But every phone had been tried. Every agency had been called, and the man standing in front of her in a flour-dusted shirt had just diagnosed 2 problems in her prep line that her own sous chef had missed. "Philip," she said without turning around. "This is a mistake," Philip said. "Philip." Silence. "Get him a clean coat," Celeste said. Donovan Slade tied the apron strings behind his back and stepped up to the pass. He did not raise his voice. He did not introduce himself with credentials. He simply walked to the center of the kitchen, looked at the 6 cooks lined up along their stations, and spoke. My name is Donovan. I know you don't know me. I know this is not how tonight was supposed to go. But the food is half built, the guests are real, and the bride is counting on every one of you. So here is what we are going to do. He rebuilt the menu from the prep that was already in place, adjusting where Renault's notes were unclear, filling the gaps with technique so clean and instinctive that Mia, standing at his right shoulder, felt her breathing slow for the first time in an hour. He reorganized the station flow. He tasted every component. He corrected the risotto base. He reseasoned the collard greens. He devised an intermezzo that had not existed 10 minutes ago. A simple, elegant buttermilk sorbet with a whisper of lemon verbena, cold and sharp. Designed to reset the palate between the heaviest courses. He did all of this while speaking to each cook by name. After asking once, remembering every one. He did not shout. He did not belittle. When the youngest cook, a 19-year-old named Danny, nearly dropped a sheet pan of seared foie gras, Donovan caught the edge of the pan with one hand, steadied it, and said, "Good recovery. Replant your feet next time." Danny stared at him, exhaled, and nodded. 2 hours and 15 minutes. Ren had been brought inside. Mia had done it. She had gone out to the van, crouched down beside the open door, and told the small girl with a rabbit that there was a spot she could sit near the pastry station where it was warm, and where she could see her father through the glass partition. Ren had followed her quietly, clutching Biscuit, and had settled onto a step stool near the dessert mise en place without saying a word. One of the pastry cooks, a woman named Sandra, had given Ren a small ball of leftover pâte sucrée to shape with her fingers. Ren was pressing it into a flat circle with immense concentration, her tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth. Celeste walked past the partition on her way to check the ballroom. She saw the girl on the stool. She saw the rabbit on the counter. She saw the child's small, flour-dusted fingers working the dough with a care that was, in some indescribable way, identical to the way the girl's father handled food. She kept walking. Philip Crane had positioned himself near the service corridor, arms folded, watching through the pass window with an expression that shifted every few minutes between resentment and disbelief. The kitchen was running. It should not have been running, but it was. 1 hour and 50 minutes. The first guests had begun arriving. Celeste could hear the string quartet warming up in the ballroom. The sommelier was decanting the first wines. The florist was making a final adjustment to the head table arrangement. Everything visible was perfect. Everything invisible depended on a man who had arrived in a bread van. Donovan called for a tasting of every course. He plated each one himself at the pass, inspected it, adjusted it. The foie gras had a glaze that caught the light. The risotto held its shape without being dense. The duck confit shredded at the touch of a fork. The lobster was translucent and sweet, and the smoked corn velouté beneath it had a depth that made Mia close her eyes involuntarily after tasting it. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked him. Donovan was plating the intermezzo. His hands moved with a kind of rhythm that only comes from years of repetition, not the stiff precision of a textbook, but the loose breathing fluency of someone who had done this 10,000 times and still paid attention every single time. "A long time ago," he said, "in a kitchen that was very different from this one." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Mia could see it in his hands. 1 hour and 12 minutes. Service began. The first course went out clean. The second course went out clean. The second course went out clean. The third course went out with a timing adjustment that Donovan called on the fly because the serving staff was running 12 seconds slow between the east and west sections of the ballroom. He adjusted the fire on 2 stations to compensate and kept every plate landing within the correct window. Philip Crane, who had been hovering near the service door, intercepted a server carrying the 4th course back through the corridor. He lifted the cloche, looked at the plate, and frowned. "The plating is not Renault's style," he said. "The bride specifically approved Renault's plating sketches." The server hesitated. Donovan, who had heard through the open door, stepped to the pass. "The composition is the same," he said. I adjusted the negative space by a quarter inch because the plate's rim is wider than the mock-up suggested. The proportions are correct. The eyeline is correct. The bride won't notice the difference. She'll notice if the plate is ugly. Philip set the cloche back down. He looked at Donovan with the slow, evaluative expression of a man trying to find a flaw and failing. You are not the chef of this hotel, Philip said quietly. No, Donovan agreed. I'm the guy who showed up. Course 5. Course 6. The rhythm of the kitchen had found its breath. The cooks had stopped glancing at each other with fear and had started glancing at Donovan with something closer to trust. Danny, the youngest cook, had not dropped anything else. He had, in fact, begun plating with a confidence that had not been there 2 hours ago. Through the glass partition, Wren was asleep. She had curled up on the step stool with Biscuit under her chin, and Sandra's spare kitchen towel draped over her shoulders like a blanket. The small ball of pâte sucrée sat on the counter beside her, pressed into the shape of a lopsided heart. Course 7. The dessert was a warm brown butter financier with a pecan praline and a bourbon caramel that Chef Renaud had designed to be the emotional peak of the meal. Donovan had tasted Renaud's caramel base. It was good, but it was missing something. It was technically flawless and emotionally flat, like a beautiful sentence with no verb. He added a pinch of sea salt and a bare half-teaspoon of black pepper to the caramel. Just enough to make the warmth catch. Just enough to give the sweetness a shadow. Mia watched him do it. He didn't have pepper in the recipe, she said. No, Donovan said. But the recipe didn't know it needed it. The dessert went out, 420 plates, each one identical, each one warm, each one carrying a small, invisible act of rebellion against a recipe written by a man who had abandoned it. The service was clean. No course was late. No plate was sent back. No guest complained. The string quartet played. The bride danced with her father. The cake was cut. The wine was poured. In the kitchen, when the last plate had been cleared and the last pan had been soaked, the 6 cooks and the 3 pastry workers and Mia stood in a loose semicircle around the pass. No one spoke for a moment. Then Danny started clapping. The sound was thin and alone for about half a second before everyone joined in. Donovan wiped his hands on a side towel and shook his head slightly as if the applause was directed at someone standing behind him. That was all of you, he said. I just told you which direction to walk. Mia's eyes were wet again. But it was a different kind of wet than before. Celeste Marchetti heard the applause from the service corridor. She stood still, her phone in one hand, a glass of champagne in the other that she had not yet sipped. She had been receiving messages for the past 30 minutes. Douglas Pemberton's wife had called the dinner magnificent. 3 guests had asked for the chef's name. The bride's mother had cried during the dessert course, which, in the language of weddings, meant it was perfect. Philip appeared at her elbow. We should position this carefully, he said. The press will ask about the kitchen. We tell them it was a team effort. We mention Renaud's menu design. We do not mention the bread delivery man. Celeste looked at him. Philip, she said. Yes, go home. Philip opened his mouth, reconsidered, and closed it. Celeste pushed through the kitchen door. The room was winding down. Cooks were stripping their stations. The dishwashers were running. Donovan was crouching near the pastry station, lifting Wren from the step stool. The girl stirred against his shoulder, murmured something into Biscuit's ear, and settled back into sleep. Celeste watched him stand with his daughter in his arms, one hand cradling her head, the other supporting her weight with the practiced ease of a man who had carried this child 1,000 times. She walked toward him. She stopped a few feet away. For a moment, she did not know how to begin. Mr. Purvis, Slade, she said. Donovan. Donovan. She paused. I need to say something to you, and I need to say it before I say anything else. He waited. When you walked into my kitchen this afternoon, I looked at your shirt. I looked at your boots. I looked at the flower on your arms and I decided that you were not qualified to be in this building. I did not ask you a single question about your experience. I did not ask what you could do. I made a judgment based on what I saw, and I was wrong." Donovan shifted Ren's weight slightly against his shoulder. He did not interrupt. "And I need to say something else," Celeste continued. Her voice was lower now. "I stood in this kitchen and allowed my events director to make a comment about your daughter being here. I heard it. I did not stop it. A man looked at a 7-year-old child in my hotel and made her feel unwelcome. And I said nothing. That is the part I am most ashamed of." Donovan was quiet for a long moment. Ren's breathing was soft and even against his neck. "She heard it," he said. "She always hears it. She's been hearing versions of it since she started coming to work with me 2 years ago. People look at us, a man with a kid in a van, and they see a problem. They don't see a father who chose his daughter over everything else." Celeste felt the words settle into her like stones dropped into still water. "I didn't choose this life because I couldn't do anything else," Donovan said. "I chose it because nothing else was worth doing if it meant she grew up without me." The kitchen was nearly empty now. The overhead lights had been dimmed. Someone had turned off the exhaust hoods, and the room was quieter than it had been all night. "Can I ask you something?" Celeste said. Donovan nodded. "Where did you train?" he told her. He said the name of the restaurant quietly, the way people say the names of places they loved and left. He told her about New York. He told her about the chef who had trained him, a man who believed that great cooking was not about control, but about listening. He told her about his wife. He told her about his wife. He told her about the months after, when the world had been a place made entirely of sharp edges, and the only thing that kept him standing was the small, warm weight of a child who needed breakfast every morning and a story every night. "I don't regret leaving," he said. "I regret that the world makes you choose." Celeste did not try to fix his story. She did not offer platitudes. She simply listened, and when he was done, she nodded once, slowly, and said, "Thank you for trusting me with that." Then she told him what she had come to say. The Grand Bellevue wanted to offer him a formal consulting contract, not a full-time position. She understood that he had built his schedule around his daughter, and she would not ask him to change it. She wanted him available for special events, for menu development, for the moments when the kitchen needed someone who could hear what a stock was saying. The contract would include a workspace in the hotel's auxiliary kitchen that he could use for his bread operation on off days, and it would include a standing policy that his daughter was welcome in any room of the hotel, at any time without exception. Donovan looked at her. "That last part," he said. "Put it in writing. It will be the first line." He did not smile exactly, but the tension across his shoulders eased in a way that made him look, for the first time that evening, like a man who was not carrying something alone. Ren stirred. She opened one eye, saw Celeste standing close, and blinked. Then she opened the other eye and regarded the tall woman with the careful, unhurried appraisal that only very young children and very old judges are capable of. "Did people like Daddy's food?" she asked. Celeste crouched down so that she was at Ren's height, the way she had seen Donovan do at the service entrance hours ago. It was not a posture she was used to. It was not the kind of thing she did. But she did it now, and her knees thanked her later for the lesson. "They loved it," she said. "Every single plate." Ren considered this. She looked at her father. "Can we go home now?" she asked. "Biscuit is tired." Donovan laughed. It was a quiet sound, warm and unhurried. The laugh of a man who had spent the last 4 hours cooking for 420 strangers, and now wanted nothing more than to drive home with his daughter and put her to bed. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said. "We can go." He carried her out through the service entrance and into the warm Charleston night. The van was where he had left it. He buckled Ren into her seat, set Biscuit in her lap, and closed the door gently. Before he started the engine, he looked back at the hotel. The windows of the ballroom were still glowing. He could hear faintly the sound of laughter and music. 420 people were in there, full and happy, and none of them knew his name. That was fine. The person who needed to know his name was sitting beside him, already falling back asleep with a flour-dusted rabbit under her chin. In the weeks that followed, the white van with Slade Bread Co., painted in simple black letters on the side, became a familiar sight in the Grand Bellevue's service lane. Donovan worked the consulting contract on his own terms. He came in early, left by 3, and was always at Wren's school by dismissal. He redesigned the hotel's bread program entirely. He consulted on 2 more large events. He trained Mia on techniques she had only read about in textbooks. He did not ask for a title. He did not ask for his name on a menu. He showed up, he cooked, and he left in time to make dinner for his daughter. Wren's stepstool became a permanent fixture near the pastry station. Sandra kept a small container of dough scraps in the walk-in specifically for her. A drawing appeared on the wall above the stool one morning. A crayon sketch of a man in an apron holding a wooden spoon, standing next to a small girl holding a rabbit. Beneath it, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My dad cooks better than your dad." The pastry team voted unanimously not to take it down. One afternoon, a food critic from a national magazine visited the Grand Bellevue to review the restaurant's new seasonal menu. Celeste escorted her through the dining room, answered her questions about the renovation, and praised the full-time kitchen staff by name. When the critic asked who had developed the bread program, which she described as the best hotel bread she had tasted in the American South, Celeste did not hesitate. "A man named Donovan Slade," she said. "He runs a one-man bakery out of a van. He's also the person who saved the largest event this hotel has ever hosted, on a Saturday when we had no right to ask him for anything, and he gave us everything." The critic wrote it down. Douglas Pemberton's daughter sent a handwritten note to the hotel 3 weeks after the wedding. It was addressed to "the chef who made my mother cry during dessert." Celeste forwarded it to Donovan. He read it at his workbench at home, with Wren on his lap, and Biscuit wedged between them. And for the first time in a long time, his eyes went bright in a way that had nothing to do with the heat of an oven. Wren looked up at him. "Are you okay, Daddy?" "Yeah, baby. I'm good. Is it because someone was nice to you?" Donovan kissed the top of her head and held her a little tighter. "It's because someone saw me," he said. Wren nodded as if this made perfect sense and turned back to the book she had been reading, a picture book about a rabbit who baked bread for the entire forest. She had picked it out herself. She turned each page with the same slow, deliberate care with which her father plated a dish, as if every detail deserved its full attention. Donovan Slade did not become famous. He did not open a fine dining restaurant. He did not appear on television. He continued to drive his white van through the streets of Charleston every morning with Wren beside him and Biscuit on the dashboard, delivering bread to people who were glad to see him. He continued to take his daughter to school and pick her up every afternoon. He continued to cook dinner in their small kitchen every evening. And he continued to tell her, in quiet ways and in loud ones, that the size of a person's life was not measured by the size of their kitchen. One evening, a new client visited the Grand Bellevue's kitchen to discuss catering for a corporate retreat. He looked around the gleaming stainless steel space, then looked through the glass partition and saw a child sitting on a stepstool with a stuffed rabbit, carefully pressing dough into a star shape. "Is that appropriate?" the man asked, gesturing toward Wren. Celeste Marchetti smiled. It was not her professional smile. It was the other one. The one she had discovered 7 months into a job that had taught her, finally, what leadership actually looked like. "Dad," she said, "is the most important person in this building. Some of the finest hands in the world are not found in famous kitchens. They are found in bread vans and rented spaces, in small lives built carefully around the people who matter most. They do not wait for spotlights. They do not ask for applause. They simply show up every single day and do extraordinary work in ordinary places. until the world has no choice but to look up and notice that something remarkable has been standing there all along, quietly, patiently, with flour on its hands and a child on its hip, waiting not to be celebrated, but simply to be seen.